Hey everybody, in this video, I'm gonna show you how literally just 5 basic chords can actually help you understand and explain all music theory regardless of how advanced it may seem to you. I know it sounds too good to be true, but this is actually the fundamental building block of all music theory. This is how to understand what your favorite players, composers, and producers are actually doing on the compositional harmonic level. So if you've been looking for just one video to help get you all the way from level 0 to completely advanced, this is the video for you. So whether you're beginner or advanced, I'm gonna be filling in all the gaps that you may have in your knowledge. And I'm gonna be sharing some really important pro tips about harmony that I learned along the way in my journey, which will hopefully save you potentially years of confusion that I actually went through myself. Also, this video is sponsored by my own courses about jazz improvisation. Many of them are geared specifically toward modern neo-soul influenced jazz piano and jazz harmony. So if you're interested in a really clear step-by-step method to get you from 0 to 100, I highly recommend you check out my courses, and it's really helpful and supportive to me and continuing to make these videos as well. Links in the description, and I'll also put it in the comments. So with all that said, let's get right into it. Let's start right at the beginning. In the beginning, there was the C major scale. Sorry, I had to get a little cinematic for a moment. The C major scale is where all modern music theory starts. I'm gonna show you what I mean by that. So within this scale is a C major 7th chord. So whenever you've heard people talk about scale degrees, we're literally just counting up the scale. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And a major 7 chord is built 1, 3, 5, 7. Now things like the 9, 11, and 13, don't worry about those for right now. Those are called extensions, and I'll explain those later because those are actually a little bit different than these core scale degrees. Now, from the C major scale, we build the C major 7 chord, and that is the first of our 5 fundamental chords for understanding all musical theory. 1, 3, 5, 7. That is what makes a major 7 chord regardless of key. It's going to be the root of that scale or that chord. And then we're going to do the 3, i.e. the major 3 from the major scale, the 5 from the major scale, and the 7 from the major scale. And thus we get the major 7 chord. Now once we understand those beginning numbers, we can start to make small changes to them to actually achieve completely distinguishable different sounds. For example, the first one we can do is called flatting the 7. And this is what is called a dominant chord. This is probably one of the most common sounds you've ever heard in music, right? And we have 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. So the 2 most defining notes of these chords are actually the 3 and 7. The major chord, we have a major 3 and major 7, but in dominant, we actually flat that 7. So we have a major 3 and flat 7. And a dominant chord is really mostly defined by a major 3 and flat 7. Okay? Now you might be wondering, but I've heard about a 9 and a sharp 9 and a flat 9 and a flat 13 and all these other things, right? All these extensions as they're called. Guess what? Every single extension that I just named, if it's built on a dominant 7th chord, which has a major 3rd and a flat 7, it is a dominant chord despite the extensions. But don't worry, we'll get deeper into that later. All that's really important at this point is that the dominant 7th chord is built like this. So that was number 2. Number 3 is going to be the minor 7 chord. How do we get there? We literally just flat the 3 now. See, these small changes make a huge difference in the sound. So now we have 1, flat 3, 5, and flat 7. And that's the sound of minor. Now before we get any further, I want to just give you a quick pro tip. Here's the funny thing about scales and how they match chords. These same little tricks that we're using where we flat the 7 and then we flat the 3, that's all we have to do for the scales as well. So if we go with a C major scale, if I want a C dominant scale, also known as C mixolydian, it's just another name for the same thing, all we have to do is flat the 7. And now we have a C dominant scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, right? And if I want a C minor scale, in this case it's going to be specifically the Dorian minor, which has a natural 6, for those of you who want to get as nerdy as possible with me here. We're just going to flat that 3rd. And now we have a C Dorian minor scale. Now the next thing we're going to do is get to chord number 4. That defines pretty much all of our music theory here. Now we're just going to flat the 5 as well. And now we have what's called a half diminished 7 chord, or you can also call it simply a minor 7 parentheses flat 5, minor 7 flat 5 chord. So minor 7 flat 5 and half diminished is just the same name for the same chord. And this is also a very distinguishable sound. And the scale for this is what we call the half diminished scale, which matches the actual chord itself. This one's just a tiny bit trickier, but what we're going to do is the following. If we take a C Dorian scale, we're going to flat the 5. Then what's a little tricky is to keep the stepwise relationships between the notes so we don't have this little jump. We're actually going to flat the 6 as well. And that's our C half diminished scale. Now finally, we're going to do one more thing to get chord number 5. We're going to now flat the 7 a second time. Now we get the sound of diminished, another one of the most common sounds you'll ever hear. So this chord is built 1, flat 3, flat 5, and now double flat 7, which is the same note as the 6. If we count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you'll see that's an A. Theoretically though, this is a double flatted 7. Diminished is really interesting because this actually splits the octave C to C perfectly. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if we move the same amount of steps, back to C. So an octave has 8 notes, in other words. This is the perfect way to split it into 4 pieces. Because of that, instead of using a 7-note scale, we use what's called an octatonic scale. And this is just called the whole half diminished. And the reason it's called that is because we go up a whole step, then a half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, back to C. And this scale actually has 8 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But don't get confused because even though I just counted 8, the degrees are still just based on the C major scale, right? So this is a flat 3, flat 5, flat 6. There we have a double flat 7. Here we actually have also a major 7. This is why diminished is interesting. So we could also just call it a 6 and a major 7. And there's a diminished scale. But I just want you to know the scales that go with these chords. And you'll see that in the scale is the chord itself, right? That's the funny thing about scales and chords. They're basically the same thing, but the scale just has notes in between those fundamental notes of the chord, which we call chord tones. Really quick, if you're learning a lot, please be sure to hit the like button to help me out with the algorithm. Really helps out. And also, if you're new here, please hit subscribe. Also really helps me out. All right, right back into it. All right, so you've now learned the 5 fundamental chords that make up pretty much all modern music theory. Now, I'm not saying there aren't other sounds, but if you understand these 5, you now understand how to get those other sounds. Let me show you what I mean. So let's try to understand extensions. You might be wondering, how do we get a 13 if there are only 7 notes? Well, if we keep counting up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we can kind of call this 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. But the only extensions we'll ever actually hear are 9, 11, and 13. Why don't we hear the others? Well, because the others are already part of our fundamental chord, the 7th chord. So we already have a 1, a 3, a 5, and a 7. So there's no reason to call this 8, 10, and 12. We already have 1, 3, 5, and 7. We don't need those extended numbers. However, we do not yet have a 9. So because we're adding the 9 on top of this fundamental chord, it becomes an extension. And therefore, D is a 9, in the key of major, we'd actually use a sharp 11 typically. So F sharp is a sharp 11, which is the same thing as sharp 4, and then A is the 13. And that's about as high as you'll go on a major chord. But let me explain further. Why is this not a 6? We don't even have a 6 in the chord yet, right? So why not just call this a 6? Well, that's because, quite simply put, the base of our chord is the 1, 3, 5, 7. This is our 7th chord. The only way we'll call this a 6th chord is actually if the 6th replaces the 7. Okay, so now the 6th is actually one of the bass notes of our chord. 1, 3, 5, 6. It replaced the 7. Otherwise, this 1, 3, 5, 7 is the bass, fundamental, root position, foundation of our chord, and anything beyond that, even if it's down here, the octave doesn't matter, is now an extension. That's a really important lesson to learn, and it actually took me surprisingly long to understand that. So now that you understand these fundamentals, let's get a little more complicated. What are some other sounds you can have? Well, we already know if we replace the 7 with a 6, now we have a C major 6 chord. What if we actually now replace the 3 with a flat 3? Now you have a C minor 6 chord, okay? So that's 1, flat 3, 5, 6. And now you might be wondering, what about that interesting sound? This is a really dark sound, right? The minor sound. Well, this is a specific type of minor, and this is actually a C minor major 7. We actually call it that because we have a flat 3, which immediately sounds minor. So 1, flat 3, 5, but then instead of a flat 7, which would be a minor 7 chord, we keep a major 7. So it's C minor, major 7. I'm also just realizing how hard it actually is to say 6th. It's kind of a difficult sound to make, and as I'm trying to extra enunciate here as I'm teaching, I'm like, wow, that is trickier than I ever realized. You might also be familiar with some other interesting sounds. Well, guess what? A really common one you'll hear is actually a sus sound. And just before y'all start commenting sus jokes, I'm not saying sus because this chord is sus. I'm saying this chord because it has a suspended 4. And we call it a suspended 4 because it really wants to resolve to 3 for some psychological reason. But this is a really unique sound of music. You've probably heard things like, this is one of my favorite sounds, honestly. And so we have 1, 4, 5, flat 7. Now, what if instead of the dominant version of this, we did a major version? Well, now we have C major 7 sus 4, which is also a beautiful sound. Less common, but quite nice. And yet another one we could do is, instead of the 3, we do a sus 2, which also wants to resolve to 3. This is another beautiful sound you'll hear. So hopefully you're starting to see and understand now how every single sound is just an adjustment of one of those 5 fundamental chords. One more really interesting sound you'll hear, used as a little tension before a release, is what we call the diminished major 7 chord. So kind of like a minor major 7, this time we have a diminished triad, but with a major 7 on top. And it often resolves to the major 7. Yet another really common sound you'll hear. All right, so now that we pretty much understand the basis of practically every interesting sound that there is harmonically in music, we can start to get a little more complicated and add extensions. So what if we wanted a more interesting C major chord instead of just the 7? Well, now we just add the D on top, and now we have a C major 9. Or if we add the sharp 11, C major 9 sharp 11, or all the way up to the 13, now we have a C major 13 sharp 11. Okay? And now here's a really great moment to talk to you about something called a voicing. Well, a voicing is literally just reordering those notes. For example, we could take that C major 13 sharp 11, and instead of doing this order, we could do 1, 5, 9, 3 sharp 11, 13 major 7. We could also do something like this. We could take the sharp 11 and put it up there, and the 13 put it up there. Interesting. We could also do it like this. My thumb hitting the 13, 7, and sharp 11. All of these are a C major 13 sharp 11 despite the order of the notes. What a pretty voicing. Now you might be wondering, what if we put the D down here? Would that actually be a 2 instead of a 9? It's tricky to reach, but the answer again is no, and you should actually know why. Because everything is still built on root position in the order that we count up the scale. If we have a 1, 3, 5, 7, and none of those notes are actually replacing those fundamental chord tones of the major 7 chord, everything else is an extension regardless of the octave. Okay, make sense? And if that doesn't make sense, please let me know in the comments. Also, quick shout out, if you're actually learning a ton right now and enjoy my teaching style and the clarity that I'm shooting for, there's a good chance that you would really enjoy some of my courses. I actually have a course called Jazz Piano Secrets, which is a complete step-by-step method that will take you from the beginnings of jazz improvisation. In fact, you could build right off of this video and go into the course and get you all the way to an advanced level using a methodology that I created called the Neo Jazz Piano Method. The reason I call it that is because it's based on a lot of modern harmony that we call non-functional, some of the really interesting things that you will hear neo-soul influenced musicians play, these beautiful chords that aren't always expected to the ear, and beautiful reharmonizations and substitutions. I cover all of that stuff in the course. I think you might really enjoy it. So in other words, a voicing is just a reordering of the notes. So let's take a look at some other extended chords that you're probably used to hearing. Well, here's a minor 11 chord. We have 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. We can add the 9, that's C minor 9. 11, now a minor 11 chord. We could also add a 13, C minor 13. If we flat the 7, now this actually becomes C minor 6 on bottom. That's our fundamental chord with the chord tones 1, flat 3, 5, 6, replacing the 7. But then we still add the D and it's a 9, or the F and it's an 11. We don't add a 13 because now the 13 is a 6 because it replaced that 7, okay? And by the way, a voicing that's really gorgeous for a minor 11 chord you might have heard before, it's called the Kenny Barron voicing, 1, 5, 9, flat 3, flat 7, 11. Beautiful voicing, love that. Another one you'll hear super commonly is 1, 5, 9, flat 3, 11, flat 7. Another beauty. Now another quick pro tip. You might have heard of something called a rootless voicing, and you might think, wait. How can it be rootless? If I play this chord and there's no C, then isn't this a G chord because G is on bottom? Well, the answer is yes and no. And it's actually simpler than it sounds. If I don't tell you what this chord is, then yes, you can assume this is something built on the note G. And that's going to come from the G major scale. So that would mean we have 1, 5, flat 6, flat 3, flat 7, right? However, if I write down on the sheet music, or if I just tell you, oh, this is actually a C minor chord, so you know this is built on, we could call it a ghost root of C, then you're still just going to theoretically write this based on the notes of a C major scale, which means we have a 5, 9, flat 3, flat 7, 11. So that's still a C minor 11 chord. And if you're playing with a band, well, then the bass player is actually playing the C. So that's why we do a rootless chord. If you're playing with a bass player, you don't need the root. The bass player is probably playing the root and it's going to sound great. So that's what a rootless chord is, or a rootless voicing. It still functions the same way. We're just kind of telling people, oh, this is a C minor chord. And if we don't tell anyone, then it might also be a C minor chord over a G, and that's okay too. All right, y'all, this is a information dense video, but the goal was hopefully to very clearly, step by step, get you from, potentially not even understanding modern harmony at all, or music harmony at all for that matter, to understanding the most advanced voicings and chords that exist. In this one video, hopefully that clarified all of that stuff for you. And of course, if you want to get way deeper in actually understanding chord progressions, understanding the rules of creating really good ones, and especially if you like neo-soul influenced chord progressions, please be sure to check out my Jazz Piano Secrets course if you haven't already. Link in the description. We actually use an awesome modern neo-jazz progression, as I like to call it, that kind of combination sound between jazz and neo-soul. We use a progression and you learn how to formulate your own progressions, how to absolutely master any voicing so it's just second nature to you on the piano. and how you can truly get comfortable with this very, very clear, again, step-by-step method that I spent years putting together and developing and testing through working with hundreds of students. So definitely be sure to check that out if you want something a bit more organized than just watching YouTube videos and trying to put together a practice routine that may or may not be ultimately all that effective. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. If you're new here, hit subscribe. Please hit the like button again if you learned something in this video. Really, really helps me out, and hopefully you learned so much that you feel like hitting the like button is only the least you could do. I tried to pack this full of value. But regardless, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And of course, there are so many scales that correspond to these chords. So if you want another video kind of like this that's going to show you the perfect scale so you can learn all the scales for every single chord I talked about for the most part in today's video, I'm going to link you right on screen to that video. All right, y'all, I'll see you over at that video.